0247 local time. The Baltic Sea off the eastern coast of Gotland Island, Sweden, was running black and cold under an overcast sky that swallowed every star. At 180 meters beneath that surface, moving at a speed so low it barely registered as motion, a Russian Kilo-class submarine was closing on a target that had no hull, no crew, and no way to defend itself. A fiber optic data cable. One of the invisible load-bearing pillars of Western economic and military coordination, carrying NATO command traffic, interbank clearing data, and encrypted intelligence feeds that together represent the circulatory system of the entire Atlantic Alliance. The Russian crew operated under strict emissions control. No active sonar, no unnecessary power draws, electric propulsion only, creeping at 3 knots through the layered thermoclines of the Baltic shallows, where temperature gradients scatter acoustic energy in ways that have humiliated European passive sonar operators for decades. The Kilo-class improved variant, coated in anechoic rubber tiles and designed specifically to frustrate the kind of broadband passive detection that works well in open ocean, had earned its reputation as a black hole. For 48 hours, German and Swedish maritime patrol assets had lost and reacquired contact multiple times before losing it altogether. Moscow's planners had run the numbers and liked them. What Moscow's planners had not accounted for was the moment US Navy assets entered the picture. When that happened, the equation changed in ways the Kilo's captain would not fully understand until it was already over. The strategic context matters here. The Baltic Sea is no longer a contested space in the traditional sense. Finland and Sweden's NATO accession transformed what had been a murky grey zone into something that Russian naval planners call, with barely concealed anxiety, a NATO lake. Every coastal state surrounding the Baltic except Russia and its enclave at Kaliningrad now falls under Article 5. That geographic reality forecloses the kind of conventional naval power projection Moscow relied on during the Cold War. What remains available is hybrid warfare, deniable, sub-threshold, calibrated to inflict maximum economic and institutional damage while staying below the level of response that triggers a formal military reaction. Severing an underwater data cable and blaming a seismic event or a dragging anchor is the cleanest version of that playbook. No missile launched, no aircraft detected, a technical incident that Western governments spend weeks investigating while financial systems stall and C-2 coordination degrades. The Kremlin had executed this approach before or come close enough to believe the concept was sound. The Kilo's captain, call him Romanov, which is close enough to the name that will eventually appear in classified NATO after-action reports, believed he was 300 meters from mission completion. He had no reason to think otherwise. His acoustic environment was working in his favor, his speed was minimal, his systems were passive. He had threaded through 2 separate NATO exercise patrol patterns without detection. From his chart table, this looked like the clean, bloodless intelligence operation that General Staff had briefed. Precision sub-sea sabotage. Plausible deniability built in from the start. The order from Moscow had been unambiguous. Execute. Do not withdraw. At 20,000 feet directly above, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft had been flying a compressed grid pattern for the past 90 minutes. The P-8A is not a passive observer. It is the central nervous system of a distributed underwater hunting network, a multi-sensor fusion platform that simultaneously processes acoustic data, magnetic anomaly readings, radar returns, and tactical feeds from every other asset connected to the Link 16 and Link 22 data networks. Its AN/APS-154, Advanced Airborne Sensor Radar maps surface anomalies and shallow submerged contacts with a resolution that would have been classified beyond top secret a generation ago. But the instrument that would locate the Kilo that night was the Magnetic Anomaly Detector, mounted on the aircraft's tail boom. A 15-foot sensor array that measures distortions in the Earth's magnetic field caused by the displacement of large metallic masses through seawater. A Kilo-class submarine, regardless of how quiet its propulsion runs, cannot make its 3,000 tons of steel invisible to a magnetometer. The P-8A had also been seeding the water below with sonobuoys in a mathematically precise deployment pattern. DIFAR directional frequency analysis buoys and diecast command-activated active units spread across 100 square nautical miles of Baltic water column. Passive, listening, waiting for the acoustic signature that matched the Kilo's cataloged profile. At 0302, the contact hardened. The underwater warfare sensor operator aboard the P-8A called it out. High-confidence magnetic anomaly signature, consistent with Kilo-class improved variant. Position locked. A fraction of a second later, the passive DIFAR network registered an acoustic transient. A single faint metallic click, the sound of an external valve opening on the Kilo's hull as the crew prepared to deploy the cable-cutting device. That sound at that position erased every remaining ambiguity. This was no longer a submarine on patrol. This was a submarine in the act. The data packet was transmitted via link 16 to the USS Winston S. Churchill, DDG-81, an Arleigh Burke, Flight 2A class guided missile destroyer, operating as the tactical coordinator for the exercise that had, in the space of the last 90 minutes, quietly transitioned from a scheduled training event into a live interdiction operation. The Churchill's AN/S PY-1D radar system and Aegis Baseline 9 combat management suite absorbed the targeting solution from the P-8A and processed it against its own sensor picture. The Kilo's position was now confirmed by 3 independent data sources, all feeding into the same shared operating picture at the speed of the network rather than the speed of voice reporting. Commander Evelyn Hayes, the tactical action officer aboard Churchill, did not hesitate. The Aegis system had already pre-selected a response from the Mk-41 vertical launch system cells, a RUM-139 ASROC, a supersonic anti-submarine rocket that carries an Mk-54 lightweight torpedo to a point 10 nautical miles away in under 2 minutes, delivering the weapon directly above a target that has no time and no room to evade. The firing solution was complete. The authorization chain was pre-vetted for exactly this scenario. What Commander Hayes chose to use instead was not the ASROC. It was something more surgical and, in its own way, more devastating to Russian confidence. The first instrument of interdiction came from below. A Swedish A-26 Gotland-class submarine, one of the quietest conventional boats in the world, running its own silent patrol as part of the NATO exercise, had been tracking the Kilo from a parallel course for 22 minutes. On cue, it deployed an acoustic countermeasure directly above the Russian vessel. Not a weapon, a wall of sound. A focused high-intensity acoustic jamming device that hit the Kilo's passive hydrophone arrays and sonar receivers like a flashbang to the inner ear. The submarine's own listening capability went white in an instant. Inside the Kilo's control room, the silence that had defined the last 48 hours of careful maneuvering was suddenly replaced by a shriek that no instrument could interpret. Romanov demanded a report. No report came. The crew had nothing to report except that every acoustic sensor aboard had been saturated simultaneously. Before the confusion could organize itself into a response, the Churchill acted. From the Mk-41 launchers on her forward deck, a training RIM-162, evolved Sea Sparrow missile, warhead removed, GPS localization package installed, launched skyward at Mach 4, and executed a cruise trajectory over the target zone. The ESSM hit the water's surface in the immediate vicinity of the Kilo with sufficient impact to be felt through the hull. It carried no explosive charge. What it carried was a data transmission, the precise GPS coordinates of the Kilo itself, accurate to within 5 meters, which matched Romanov's own inertial navigation system, readout number for number. The P-8A then dropped 6 die-cast active sonobuoys in a tight ring above the Kilo's position. Each one began emitting active sonar pings, not passive listening, but aggressive acoustic energy that reflected off the Kilo's hull and painted it in full relief for every sensor in the network. The submarine's hull began to resonate. There was no acoustic shadow left to hide in. The final communication arrived as a compressed digital burst transmitted through the sonobuoy network directly to the Kilo's acoustic receivers. A single set of coordinates and a text message that required no translation. Target locked. Disengage immediately. Failure to comply will result in escalation. The coordinates were the Kilo's own position. Romanov stared at his chart for 4 seconds. The training missile had proven Aegis could solve his targeting solution with sub-5 meter accuracy. If that had been an ASROC rather than an inert ESSM, there would be no decision to make. He looked at his crew. He looked at the acoustic cage surrounding him on every sensor display that still functioned. At 03:05, he gave the only rational order available. All stations, abort mission, withdraw at flank speed. A Kilo-class submarine at flank speed generates a noise profile approximately equivalent to a freight train underwater. Every passive sonar asset in the NATO network that had struggled to maintain contact at 3 knots now had no difficulty at all. The black hole had become a beacon. Romanov's attempt at a clean, deniable operation ended with his submarine racing north at 17 knots, broadcasting its acoustic signature across the entire southern Baltic, its position logged in real time by the P-8A, the Churchill, the Swedish A-26, and 3 additional NATO surface assets that had been operating at the edges of the patrol area. The entire active interdiction phase, from first acoustic jamming to the Kilo's withdrawal order, ran 135 seconds. The aftermath was more consequential than the confrontation itself. Moscow issued no statement. There was nothing to say. A Kilo-class submarine that had been marketed to the world as acoustically undetectable had been located, caged, and forced to surface-equivalent behavior by a NATO kill chain it never sensed assembling around it. More critically, the 17-knot retreat had gifted the P-8A's sensor suite an unambiguous full-power acoustic signature under real Baltic thermal conditions. The specific temperature gradients, salinity layers, and bottom reflection profiles of the operational environment the Kilo was designed to exploit. That acoustic fingerprint is now in NATO's sonar database. Every future deployment of every Kilo-class boat operating in northern European waters carries that liability forward. The black hole has a frequency now. It can be found. The Churchill's crew returned to standard patrol posture within the hour. No celebration, no announcement. The ship's log recorded a training exercise with a successful sensor integration evaluation. That description is technically accurate and tells you almost nothing about what actually happened. What this operation demonstrated goes beyond anti-submarine warfare tactics. The Kilo class represents exactly the kind of asymmetric threat that Russia has historically used to create doubt in NATO planners. Not fast enough or capable enough to challenge a carrier strike group, but quiet enough and cheap enough to operate in contested shallows where larger assets can't easily follow. The theory was that this class of submarine could act below the detection threshold, inflicting hybrid damage while preserving deniability. That theory required the detection threshold to stay where it was in 2010. It didn't. The integration of the P-8A's multi-sensor fusion capability with the Aegis Combat Management System and the distributed sonobuoy network moved that threshold to a place where a 3-knot creep through layered Baltic thermoclines is not a guarantee of invisibility. It is simply a slower version of being found. The message to Moscow from this engagement is precise and cold. Plausible deniability as a strategic instrument requires that the operation remain undetected or at least unattributable. Once a U.S. Navy P-8A has locked your magnetic signature and the Churchill has transmitted your own coordinates back to you through your own acoustic receivers, deniability is not plausible. It is fiction. And the Americans proved they could deliver that message without expending a single live weapon or creating a single casualty. Which means they can do it again whenever they choose, without the political cost of escalation. The Baltic Sea, now ringed by NATO coastal states with interconnected sensor networks feeding into shared tactical data systems, has become a fundamentally different operational environment than the one Russian naval doctrine was written to exploit. The geography hasn't changed. The physics of underwater acoustics haven't changed. What changed is the density and integration of the surveillance architecture layered over that geography and the speed at which that architecture can translate a detected contact into a delivered message. Romanov made the correct call when he withdrew. A different captain might have held his course, and the outcome would have been measured in hull depth rather than career damage. The training ESSM was a demonstration. The ASROC was available. How do you assess Russia's next move in this environment? Does this kind of operational failure accelerate a shift toward unmanned undersea vehicles and autonomous systems that don't require a crew to risk, or does the institutional momentum of the Russian Navy keep it committed to platforms that are losing their core advantage? And what does the Baltic's transformation into a de facto NATO sensor network mean for the broader hybrid warfare playbook that Moscow has relied on across multiple domains? Drop your analysis in the comments. The strategic calculus here is genuinely complex, and the perspectives from people who track these systems closely are worth reading. If this breakdown sharpened your understanding of how modern multi-domain anti-submarine operations actually function, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next file covers a dimension of undersea infrastructure warfare that goes considerably further than one cable and one submarine, and the implications reach well beyond the Baltic.